Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this is probably going to be the absolute last video you guys will see of me in person for a while now, but quote unquote in person, but at the time I'm recording this, I'm planning to go away on vacation, and I am not going to be home, so this will be the last thing you see of me, so I figured I might as well review Trollhunters one final time before I leave. But in any case, this episode, Skullcrusher, is the episode where Jim and Gunmar first meet. That's essentially what the episode, well, not necessarily what the episode is about, but it is one of the main things that comes up in this episode. It is where they first interact and where they first meet face to face, because up until now they have not done that. We've seen Gunmar, but previously he's mostly appeared as like a shadowy thing as the silhouette of Gillhead Bridge. But Jim and Gunmar have never officially met face to face, so that's kind of what the main thing of the episode is. But it's not the only thing with the episode because of what the plot is, but it is the main event that happens. But in case the episode opens up with Jim being escorted through the Darklands, and it's somewhat of a continuity error because Jim is established to have been knocked out in the previous episode, whereas in this one he's fine. He hasn't been knocked out at all. He's just being dragged around, and eventually Jim is thrown into a cell by the Gum-Gums, and at which point Jim calls out Dictatious, specifically pointing out the obvious problem that Dictatious. Jim points out that Blinky thinks his brother's dead, and when Dictatious obviously is not. So he points out that if Blinky knew what he was doing, that he would never approve, and also would be very, very disgusted to be related to a traitor. But of course he insists that he should save his strength and tells him that he really should, that he fully understands what Jim is capable of, but also points out that Jim is going to have to save his strength because soon Gunmar is going to want to deal with him personally, and he's going to very much want to kick his ass for killing his son. So for that reason, he tells him to save his strength, but then proceeds to walk away. But also points out that he could also make Jim's life a living hell if he so chooses, if he decides to be stubborn. And Jim, of course, decides to be stubborn. He decides to try and attack Dictatious despite being locked in a jail cell. And Dictatious tells him to have it his way and proceeds to leave. Meanwhile, Claire winds up using her shadow staff to sneak into a meeting between Vendel and Usurna, and they are arguing about destroying Gillhead Bridge. And of course, Usurna is pointing out that they need to destroy it because obviously, as long as the bridge is still around, Gunmar could very easily get out. But the obvious problem with that is that, as Vendel points out, is that obviously if they destroy the bridge. First and foremost, he points out that they can't destroy the bridge. That's why it's scattered into pieces. If they could destroy the bridge, they would have. But more to the point, he points out that the bridge points out that they can't destroy the bridge, but also points out the obvious fact that if she does get rid of the bridge, somehow find a way to successfully destroy the bridge, she would be signing Jim's death warrant. But she admits that it doesn't matter. That Jim signed his own death warrant the moment he decided to betray the rules and go into the Darklands to face Gunmar on his own, and proceeds to point out that she does know of a way to get rid of the bridge. Not necessarily destroy it, but just shove it into a deep dark hole where nobody will ever see it ever again, and make sure that it never gets reassembled. And declares that the rest of the Troll Tribunal has already agreed on this, and that Vendel is kind of the only one that hasn't, and declares that Gillhead Bridge will never see the light of day again. And of course, Claire overhears this entire conversation and realizes that's a big problem. But in any case, meanwhile, as Claire is watching the meeting, we actually get to see a brief glimpse of But in case shortly after Claire goes to the meeting, she then proceeds to walk over to where she then proceeds to walk past her brother's room, and she sees her parents holding NotEnrique and playing with him and helping him get to sleep. And they're very confused because obviously up until this point they had no idea that NotEnrique was a thing, and they still don't. So obviously they think that Enrique has just suddenly gotten a lot better at going to sleep. And they're very confused about why Enrique is acting differently, but they otherwise don't comment on it. So, but in any case, Claire then proceeds to go and sit down in her room, and she pulls up a picture of Jim on her phone, which is a little bit jarring because it's in 2D while the series is in 3D, so it's a little bit weird. But of course, it's a fun little stylistic choice thing, obviously, but. She pulls it, but of course, as she's thinking about how to get Jim out of the Darklands, NotEnrique comes into her room and starts cleaning up some of his stuff. And she is, of course, confused as to what's going on, and he just proceeds to explain to it straight. He's leaving, mainly because he doesn't really think he has a place at their house anymore. Obviously, with his changeling familiar out of the Darklands, he no longer can take on his human form and can no longer disguise himself, which means he's just stuck in troll form pretty much the entire time. And of course, that is a big problem. That is a big problem for him because it means he can no longer really hang out in the house anymore. He's just forced to sneak around. He's just forced to kind of sneak around and all those other things. So he decided that it's probably time for him to leave, but also points out that he doesn't really know where he'll go, pointing out that troll market really isn't his style either. So he'll have to figure it out, thinking he doesn't really have a place anymore. And of course, Claire proceeds to offer him Snoozy Snooze as a parting gift, which he gladly accepts because she points out that it would miss her, that she would miss him, and he takes the stuffed rabbit, which is a cute gesture. But she also then proceeds to point out that maybe he doesn't have to go just yet, and she may have a plan to actually get him out of it, that it will involve him, and his ears kind of perk up because he realizes he can still be useful. But of course it's at this point where it then proceeds to cut to Blinky's library. And Blinky is currently studying up ways on he's currently looking over at Arg and trying to figure out solutions to his current petrification problem. He's trying to figure out how to resurrect Arg. And of course, right on cue, Toby proceeds to walk in with the books that Blinky asked for, and Toby is upset with Blinky because he didn't explain that they were filled with scorch beetles. We don't get a good look at them, but the scorch beetles are kind of like these little beetle things that are just on fire. They're kind of interesting. But in any case, he proceeds to bring Blinky the book that he asked for after stomping on the fire beetles, which, interestingly enough, make a fart sound when they're stepped on, which is funny. But he then proceeds to pull, but of course, Blinky then proceeds to pull open the book, and of course, so Toby then proceeds to point out that they thought they were looking into resurrecting Arg, and Blinky then proceeds to point out that yes, that is exactly what they are doing, but also points out that in order to do that, they need to research the poison that killed him, and figure out who made it. And sure enough, Blinky eventually, unfortunately, finds an answer, and it's revealed that the Janus Order is the one who made it. And of course, we know who the Janus Order is. This is the first time the main characters have actually learned about what the Janus Order is, about how it's a network of changelings and not just, a group of, and not just like the occasional odd changeling that they've had to fight and or kill up until this point. But of course, Blinky points out that he finally knows what the Janus Order is, and points out that the Janus Order is he describes them very sinisterly, but he describes them as this secretive group where that is incredibly hard to find, and are kind of like a group of shadowy assassins, where they go, death only follows. And of course, Toby thinks that's good news because now they know who to look for to actually find the cure for Arg. But Blinky points out the exact opposite, pointing out the obvious problem, and that's that the Janus Order is very secretive and very hard to find. Because all of their members are changelings. Obviously, that means they can be human or troll form whenever they want, and can pretty much just hide in plain sight wherever, whenever. They could be hiding in Troll Market. They could be hiding in the surface above. It doesn't really matter. They can just be in hiding forever. But and of course, Blinky points out the obvious problem that in order to prove that they need to find it, in order to find the Janus Order, they would essentially be looking for the Easter Bunny, as Blinky describes it. He points out that that the Cure might as well lie with the Easter Bunny, because that is essentially the odds they are finding the Janus Order. Because the Easter Bunny obviously isn't real. Obviously, people should know this. Like, if you're over a certain age, you probably know that the Easter Bunny isn't real. But that's essentially what Blinky is describing. It's essentially the odds of finding. They have the odds of finding this impossible mythological, this impossible holiday figure. This is impossible to find holiday figure. Then they do the Janus Order, which really exists. And of course, Toby points out that they'll figure it out, pointing out the whole hopeless isn't devoid of hope, and all those things. And it points out that they will eventually figure it out. And at which point, Vendel proceeds to walk in and wonder what exactly it is they are talking about. And they play it off as them just tidying up. But Vendel points out that no, he knows better than that, and points out that obviously because of their the little stunt they pulled last episode where they tried to stop the Troll Tribunal from breaking Killahead Bridge, he has since been put on a careful watch over them, and is there to make sure that they don't do anything else shady, because they're essentially on probation. And then tells them to share what they're conspiring, and of course they proceed to tell them that they're just trying to figure out a way to bring Art back. And of course Vendel understands where they're coming from, and points out that it is sad, but also points out that it clearly has nothing to do with the Troll Tribunal's edict to throw away Killahead Bridge. And that causes them to immediately sit up and try to protest. But of course, this is this point where Claire walks in and proceeds to explain that they've already know about the decision to get rid of Killahead Bridge, pointing out that she's already learned all of that. And they've already learned all of that, and they've already learned that are already cool with the consequence of that. Of course, Toby and Blinky, this is obviously the first time they're hearing this. They don't fully understand what's going on, but Claire then proceeds to kind of calmly explain, and they just proceed to follow her lead. And at which point she proceeds to explain how she understands that Jim going to the Darklands has caused a whole mess of trouble, and that they've accepted the decision, and that they understand that Jim going into the Darklands has caused consequences for everyone, and not just him. And of course, Vendel, very happy with her response, then tells the rest of the group to tidy away, and then proceeds to leave. And of course, Toby and Blinky are obviously very visibly confused as to why she would say something like that. But she points out that she had actually expected them to do something like that, because obviously they wanted to get rid of Killahead Bridge, and she was suspecting that they would throw it away and get rid of it and never to be seen again. So she planned for that, which is what she asked NotEnrique to do. She tells them that she asked NotEnrique to essentially hide where they are storing the Killahead Bridge pieces, so that it doesn't get thrown away, and proceeds to tell them that Killahead Bridge, that he'll contact her when Killahead Bridge is being moved, so that she will have him as an emotional anchor that she can just pop into wherever he is and pull the bridge pieces out. And points out that they'll have to hide it somewhere remote, but that it'll work. And of course, both Toby and Blinky are very happy with this plan, pointing out that they can use that they can now one step closer to getting Jim out, but they also need to figure out a way to do it without the Janus Order noticing. But of course, that is in fact exactly what they're planning to do. But of course, Blinky, happy with the plan, instructs them to go and prepare for that, and prepare for NotEnrique's call so that they can get Jim out of the Darklands, while he, as he puts it, figures out where to find the Easter Bunny, which, as he looks at Arg, which heavily implies that he's gonna go figure out how to find the Janus Order and get in contact with them so they can get the cure for Arg's creeper sun poisoning. And meanwhile, we then proceed to cut to the school, and we find out how they've been covering for Jim. As it turns out, Claire and Toby have told everyone that Jim is suffering from some rare, heretofore unknown disease that nobody really knows what is. Nobody really knows how he got it. All I know is that he will probably not be coming back to school for a while. And of course, Senior Ol proceeds to make an announcement over the intercom, telling everybody of this fact. At which point, and we find out that Eli is gathering loose change to kind of create a fund for Jim. But of course, we find out that ironically enough, this is really interesting. But we find out that there is in fact exactly one person who does not buy a word of it and believes that there's something else going on. Steve. So yeah, Steve. Interesting. We'll get to this, but Steve has figured out Steve has figured out that something is going on, but he's wrong as to why. He doesn't understand. But he of course then proceeds to get up in front of everybody and proceeds to tell everybody that gym-like disease isn't a real thing. He proceeds to knock the can of donations out of Eli's hand, telling him that he should really waste his time with something else, because he points out gym-like disease, that there's nothing to cure. There's no gym-like disease. He looked it up. He found that there's not a single case of it other than what Jim has. So he knows so he knows somebody is making something up. And of course he then proceeds to confront Toby and Claire about it. Specifically Toby, because he knows he can intimidate Toby. But he confronts Toby about it and demands to know what he's covering for, why Jim isn't showing up. And of course Toby proceeds to just tell him the story he's been telling him, how there's a disease that Jim has that they're trying to cure, all of those things. But of course Steve doesn't buy a word of it. But then we find out that yes, he knows something's going on, but he doesn't understand that why. So Steve then proceeds to go on to explain how he believes that Jim is currently hiding and pretending to be sick because he thinks that Jim is trying to upstage him as the Spring Fling King. And of course, that's not what's happening. Obviously, we know Jim's in the Darklands, but of course, Toby points out that that's not what's happening at all, and that he's just sick. But of course, he proceeds to push Toby around and continues to tell him that he needs to stop lying and covering for Jim. And Toby does start to get sick he's starting to get sick of Steve's attitude, because obviously Steve is being very insensitive, and this is probably Steve's worst episode, by the way. But he's being very insensitive, and he's honest to God mocking Toby for covering for somebody who can't even be bothered to show up to school, and also makes up a fake disease about it to cover for his ass on top of that. And Toby does wind up getting upset with him and is about ready to go to hit him, but of course he eventually decides to let it go, and Steve proceeds to point out that is exactly what he thought, that Toby would never mess with him. And of course Claire then proceeds to tell him that he should really leave Toby alone, because it's not worth picking on Toby for. He points it out. It's not worth picking on Toby over. And also tells Toby that he's not worth it. That Steve isn't worth it. But also tells him to shove off, because obviously he should really mind his own business, and that it's not really worth talking to him about, and that he's not really worth the time of day for it. But and of course Steve fully understands that something's up now that Claire is also in on it, and winds up accidentally slamming his hand in her locker, trying to intimidate her, which does not work. But he then declares that he will eventually figure out what exactly it is that's going on, and that he will eventually find out how Toby is, where Jim is, and what they're covering for, and declares that he is Spring Fling King, and that he will figure this out, because Jim will not upstage him yet again. But he then proceeds to seemingly leave. We'll get to that, but in the process, he proceeds to seemingly leave, but of course it's at this point where Claire reassures Toby that he shouldn't have that he did the right thing by not socking Steve in the jaw, telling him that he wasn't worth it, and does tell them that they'll just need to stall for time until NotEnrique is able to contact them. And sure enough, right on cue, NotEnrique proceeds to call them, and she proceeds to ask NotEnrique where he is so they can figure out where to get him, but he points out that he doesn't really know where he is, other than that it's dark, and he hears a lot of water, and he hears people referring to captains, and he hears people referring to captains and stuff like that. He's not entirely sure where he is. But of course they proceed to point out that this is their chance, and she proceeds to lead Toby away from school, even though he wonders what exactly they're supposed to do about school. But she points out that school can wait. At which point they just leave, and so Steve proceeds to reveal that he never actually left the scene. He's just been hiding out behind the lockers. And he proceeds to realize that they're going to lead him directly to Jim, and now he knows exactly where to find them. So, but in case he then proceeds to follow them. Meanwhile, Jim is currently in his cell. He's currently trying to dig his way out with his glaives. And he's currently trying to dig his way out, and rather ineffectively, might I mention. It's not working like at all. But he proceeds as he's doing that, he proceeds to think through all of the things that have happened up until now, and about all the more to the point, all the mistakes he's made along the way, because he believes he's made quite a few of them, and he's also thought about thinking about all of his loved ones and what they're probably thinking about right now. But of course, as he's thinking about that, he hears a voice just speaking to him. And he doesn't fully understand who. We kind of know who. I specifically know who. It sounds like someone we've met before. So it is someone we'll once again be re-seeing. But the voice just tells him that he shouldn't have come there, and that the Skullcrusher will kill him. And he doesn't fully understand who he's talking to. He just hears a voice speaking to him. But essentially, after this, Jim, as the voice, she tells him that he shouldn't have come there. It's at this point where Dictatia shows up with two gum-gums, throws a bag over Jim's head, and tells him that it's time for him to meet the Skullcrusher, and proceeds to drag him to the throne room. At which point, Dictatius finds a nougat nummy on the floor and proceeds to pick it up and carry it around with him, pointing out that it's amusing that he found it, and is a little confused as to why some sort of confectionery treat wound up in there, but otherwise he doesn't comment on it. He doesn't fully understand what's going on. He should yet. We'll get to that. But in any case, it's at this point where he proceeds to bring Jim to the throne room, where we meet Gunmar finally. This is where we finally meet him. And they proceed to drag Jim to the throne room, and it says that to wait there while he consults the Skullcrusher. And at which point he proceeds to go up to where Gunmar's throne room is. And while Dictatius is busy, Jim successfully manages to free himself and successfully fights off against the two guards that were guarding him and manages to kill one. And it's at this point where Gunmar sees all of this from his throne room and from his throne. And what we find out also is that the throne, this is not heavily stated, but the throne is described in the book in several places. I forget where, but I think the Art of Trollhunters specifically, where they describe it as a carved out heartstone. And this is the first heartstone we've seen. We've seen several throughout the Darklands, which, when you think about it, makes sense. This was originally the Trolls' homeworld, so it makes sense there would be heartstones here. But in case he then proceeds to tell them that they obviously should not have gone. That obviously they should be ashamed of themselves for losing to a mere boy. Then losing to the Trollhunter. At which point we finally see him. He emerges from the shadows, and we finally get to see him face to face. And he proceeds to pull out his Decimar blade, which is just as we find out, he can evoke to his hands similar to how Jim does with daylight. And he proceeds to summon his Decimar blade and proceeds to mind control the remaining Gum-Gum, telling it that it will never fail him again. And of course, the Gum-Gum then proceeds to walk right past Jim, who he had previously been fighting with not 2 minutes ago, and then proceeds to walk into a pit, open a grate, drop into a pit, and is mauled to death by the native wildlife of the Darklands, whatever is down there. We don't know, but we hear noises of something being ripped apart. So, yeah, that seems to establish what Gunmar's abilities are. He can control minds. they pretty much established right immediately that that's what his power is and what makes him dangerous. He can control minds, but in case Gunmar is amused, pointing out that the rumors were true and that that the Troll Hunter has finally been picked as a human. He's a little amused by that. But and of course he proceeds to get up close and personal with Jim. Although Dictatious tells him to keep his distance because he has the Eclipse Sword. But of course Gunmar points out that he's not entirely sure Jim can properly wield it yet. And of course he proceeds to tell Jim that he needs to be able to touch him to hurt him, and then proceeds to essentially knock Jim around a bit because he's both pissed. Jim is his nemesis. Jim is the Troll Hunter is only the latest in several Troll Hunters who have been keeping him in the Darklands for centuries. So he's obviously a little pissed off at Jim, but also is pissed off on Jim for a personal reason because Jim killed his son. And of course then proceeds to beat the ever-loving snot out of Jim before pinning him to the wall and telling him exactly that as a grieving father, what is he to do but beat the actual shit out of Jim. And Jim, of course, in the process, reveals that he has actually unlocked one new thing from the remaining Triumvirate Stones, which is a helmet. He just summons a helmet to defend himself, so that his head is no longer vulnerable. It doesn't work, but because he ultimately just gets pummeled immediately, and eventually the helmet breaks. But as Gunmar is beating the shit out of Jim, it's at this point where Dictatious gets a better look at the nougat nummy he picked up, and he realizes that they've written "Keep it crispy" on the wrapper in a coded message. Of course, they've abbreviated it. But he then proceeds to come to Jim's aid and insist that Jim needs to live. And Gunmar ultimately decides to show restraint and drops Jim, and he's taken back to his cell with Jim declaring that he will kill Gunmar just like he did his son. At which point he's just dragged back to his cell. But of course, Dictatious is happy that Gunmar showed restraint, but Gunmar just tells Dictatious to get out with it, pointing out that he had taken Jim's death away from him, and that he better have a very good reason for that. At which point Dictatious gives him the nougat nummy he found, which of course Gunmar is a little confused about at first. He doesn't fully understand what Dictatious is trying to show him, but he then proceeds to go on to explain how his friends are leaving him coded messages. At which point Gunmar finally understands. The bridge isn't gone, he can still get out. And of course this causes him to realize that if the bridge is still around, then obviously his friends will try to let him out and let Jim out, and he can follow shortly after. He realizes that this is a great plan, and he thanks Dictatious for bringing this to his attention, and then proceeds to point out that now that he knows what to do, he will once he's free from the Darklands, he will be able to enact the Eternal Night and make sure that his troops can finally rule over the surface lands. And that winds up being a major thing for the conflict. This is the first time they've ever name dropped the Eternal Knights, but it is a thing that happens at the very end of the series. It is the series finale, actually. It's what happened. And it also sets up the plot of 3 Below when we get to that. But yeah, the Eternal Night is important. The Eternal Night is this big conflict that's going to happen at the end of the series. So it does officially get name dropped here. But meanwhile, Toby and Claire have since walked out into the middle of the nowhere, and they are prepared to just kind of transport whatever's out there, where the Troll Tribunal presumably can't find it. So they bring it out into the wilderness where nothing lives, so they can easily pull it out. And of course Toby once again starts sticking his head into the fetch, pointing out that he hasn't still found Jim, but he keeps leaving him nougat nummies, although he admits he's running out. He admits that he's only got a handful left, so he doesn't really know if Jim is finding them. But of course, at this point where they then proceed to get ready to find NotEnrique wherever he is using the Shadow Staff, and figure out how to get him out. And Claire does successfully summon a portal, pointing out that the Shadow Staff is charged by emotions, which is why she's gotten really good at it. But also points out that that's the reason why it's charged by emotions, and currently her trying to get the guy she likes out of the Darklands so that they can be together again. This is plenty emotional. So she's got a lot of fuel to build up. But she also admits that she doesn't know how many she has left in them, so she'll have to act quickly. At which point Toby motions to come with her, but she proceeds to tell him that he needs to stay there. Both A, to catch the boxes that she's about, or whatever that she's gonna throw out. But whatever the pieces of Kill Ahead Bridge are in, she's gonna throw them to Toby. But also points out that Toby needs to be there to be a lookout. She points out that and also has an emotional anchor, pointing out that she doesn't know where she's going, so she needs Toby so that she can get back, regardless. So either way, Toby is a little upset that he doesn't get to come with, but understands. So he just kind of sits tight for most of the rest of the episode while Claire climbs into her portal and is inside a shipping container. She doesn't fully understand where she is at first. But eventually she does find NotEnrique cowering in a box. And she wonders what he's doing in there, and he claims that Snoozy Snooze is afraid of the dark, but in actuality he's just talking through Snoozy Snooze. And of course she also wonders where they are, and he doesn't really know, but also points out that he's been hearing noises, that he's been hearing people calling people captain and other things, in other nautical terms. So he points out that they could be on a spaceship for all he knows, but she reasons that they might be on some sort of boat. But also points out that they'll need to act quickly and start getting the pieces out, and she immediately starts doing that. But it's at this point where she hears someone saying that this is the crate they'll need to throw overboard, and they're not entirely sure what's going on. But then they realize that they're on the cargo boat and that they're going to be dumped, which adds a bit of time pressure to the rest of the episode, because now Claire has to work against the clock. They have been shoved off the cargo boat into the ocean, are currently sinking, and because it's made of metal, the metal is currently buckling and flooding with water. And of course, Claire points out that they're not going to be able to, that the metal isn't going to hold for long, and they need to act quickly. And sure enough, they spend the better part of, I would say, a couple of hours, I would imagine, just transporting all of the boxes with the pieces of Kill Ahead Bridge in them, as well as some of the individual pieces that are just scattered here or there. But they throw the bridge. She's throwing them through the portal, but NotEnrique notices that she's struggling a little bit as they get into the home stretch, and is starting to have difficulty summoning portals. And eventually, this gets to the point where she eventually wears herself out to the point where she can't really make any more portals, but they have one last box. But it's at this point where she then proceeds to where NotEnrique tries to reassure her, telling her that they only have the one box left and that they need to get it out. And she doesn't really know if she has it in her, but she'll do her best. But she's obviously struggling. But it's at this point where the box also starts taking on water as well. And Toby doesn't fully understand what's going on the other end, because obviously he doesn't see any of this. He's currently just playing catch, and is also a little annoyed that Claire isn't giving him much of a heads up when they're throwing the boxes out. But of course, Toby then proceeds to. But of course, as Toby is currently cleaning up boxes, it's at this point where Steve winds up following them to where they are, to building Kill Ahead Bridge. And of course, he believes that they're leading him to Jim, when actually that's not really what's happening. But he then proceeds to follow them into the woods, where he sees Toby and all of the boxes, and immediately demands to know what he's doing. And of course, Toby points out that Steve shouldn't be there, because it's not a great place for him to be, and that this isn't something that he really needs to leave. But Steve insists that he's not leaving. And then proceeds to tell Toby that he knows Jim is that they know they're covering for Jim, and also demands to know what they're doing. And Toby tries to cover for it, claiming that they're just building a fort and that he's not allowed to be around for it. But he insists that Steve insists that he's not leaving until he sees Jim, because he knows Jim's out there somewhere. And of course, Toby, realizing he's not going to leave until Jim shows up, decides to hide behind his tree and puts on his glamour mask. Although Steve is not entirely sure where Toby went now, but he does understand something's weird's going on. But of course, Toby as Jim then proceeds to insist that he needs to leave and that he needs to get out of there, because this is a very involved thing that he's not allowed to be part of. But Steve does also realize that Jim was probably faking after all, because obviously he sees Toby as Jim and believes that Jim was faking. So he decides to declare that he's actually, you know, the fraud, that he's actually right, and that Jim, as payment for to cover for him, makes Jim quote unquote Jim kiss his ass so that he doesn't tell the entire school that he was faking. And Toby realizes he doesn't really have time for this, but then he sees the portal forming. Then he sees one of Claire's portals forming behind Steve, so he decides to filibuster a bit and does decide to kick Steve's ass, only so that he can stall for time for Claire to summon the remaining portal and get the last of the bridge pieces out. And this of course causes him to repeatedly kiss Steve's ass, bowing down to him, calling him the king, and also playing into Steve's ego by just claiming that he is the king of everything. He is the king of the world, king of the ocean, king of everything. And of course, Steve is increasingly likes the sound of it coming from Jim, but also points out that Jim, and also decides to film the entire thing for posterity as well. But also proceeds to insist that Jim is going to get that Jim doesn't specifically get to walk away after all the quote unquote humiliation Jim has caused him. So he decides that he's been looking a long time forward to kicking Jim's ass, and of course he proceeds to try and pick Jim up, but since it's actually Toby, he's a lot heavier than Steve is expecting, and proceeds to unsuccessfully throw him, which of course causes Toby's glamour mask to fall off, and Steve has no idea where Jim is now, because he doesn't fully understand the purpose of the glamour mask or what it is. He doesn't even see the glamour mask lying in the grass somewhere. Neither of them do. And of course, Toby just tries to play it off that Jim is still here, but of course, Steve points out that Jim is such a flake that they couldn't even leave his only friend that he left his only friend to defend himself, and tells him that he's worthless, and that Toby is worthless for trying to defend Jim. But Toby meanwhile points out that he's wrong and that they're not worthless and they'll get Jim back. And meanwhile, Claire is having a very emotional moment where obviously the water is flooding, and NotEnrique is realizing that he tries to intimidate her to get her portal to summon up again by immediately calling her worthless and doing a whole bunch of other things as well as an emotional thing to try and get her charged, and also tells her that he steals things from her purse, he uses her toothbrush to clean her ears, and a whole bunch of other things, which of course causes her to finally summon one of the final boxes that they need, but it's not enough. And although she does thank him for what he does, and although she can't get the box out by herself, and of course she doesn't fully understand how to do it. But it's at this point where the water starts flowing and they only have the one box left, and she's currently very emotionally drained. But of course they start drowning at this point. Well, the water starts filling the container. It's full of water. They cannot swim, and of course NotEnrique confirms in this episode that he cannot swim. So he is currently drowning. He's currently drowning and immediately passes out. And Claire, realizing that NotEnrique might drown if she doesn't do something, immediately summons her portal. And it's around this point where Toby is standing up to Jim, at which point Toby is standing up to Steve, at which point a massive portal opens up, and Toby then decides that Claire was right and that Steve wasn't worth it, and then proceeds to take a step back before asking him if he knows the meaning of the words of the phrase "heads up." And of course, Steve doesn't fully understand until the final box lands on top of him and knocks him out cold. And At which point, Claire and NotEnrique emerge from the portal, and NotEnrique isn't moving. He's not breathing. And of course, Claire tells Toby that he's not breathing, at which point Toby immediately performs CPR, because technically Miss Janet did CPR on him once, and he figured it out from there. So he proceeds to go and perform CPR on NotEnrique, and NotEnrique eventually does wake up and coughs up the water, and is happy that he got saved, but then also is very thankful to Claire for getting them out of there, and wonders what emotion she used to get them out. And she proceeds to explain that what she got is fear. She was afraid that she would lose NotEnrique as her surrogate brother, so she used her portal staff powers to save both of them, which makes them both which of course is a very big and very happy, is a very big and very happy thing. But of course, it's at this point where as they're trying to figure out what to do with the bridge now that they've, essentially stolen, although they do take an opportunity to celebrate about it. It's at this point where Claire finally realizes that Steve got knocked the fuck out. It's like, she just sees him underneath a box. She doesn't fully understand what he's doing there, why he's there, but then also wonders what exactly they're supposed to do with him. At which point, Toby gets a very brilliant idea. At which point, he leaves Steve on a bench in the park, and Steve is just lying there and is eventually woken up by a cop. The same cop that has been showing up for the past couple of episodes, but he shows up. He tells Steve that he asks Steve what exactly it is he's doing and why he's currently lying in the middle of the park on the bench. And Steve points out that, and Steve proceeds to reveal, he's trying to make sense of what's going on. He doesn't fully understand what happened, but he's trying to make sense of it. But he then proceeds to go on to explain to the cop how he was in the woods. He saw Jim was Toby and Toby was Jim. He wasn't fully understand. There was water that fell from the sky, and he was king, and claims he was king of the ocean. Which, of course, the cop immediately tries to arrest Steve for because it's all a bunch of crazy nonsense. And of course, it sounds insane, like it literally does. But of course, Steve then proceeds to declare that he has proof and proceeds to pull out his phone. But it's revealed that Toby has actually erased the video that was on Steve's phone and replaced it with one of his own, wearing Steve's crown and mocking him. And then the cop doesn't buy any of this, of course, because Steve has no proof and proceeds to try and arrest him. But Steve, in a last-ditch effort to get the cop to listen to his story, proceeds to try and lead him back to the woods. But of course, the cop just grabs him and knocks him down and proceeds to drag him off. And that's where the episode ends. So first and foremost, this is the episode where Jim and Gunmar finally face off for the first time and finally meet. And what we've confirmed from this episode is that Jim isn't quite where he needs to be to face Gunmar yet. That will come. That day will eventually come, but he's not ready to face Gunmar yet, because obviously this is the middle of the story. He's the final boss. They still have work to do to be able to take on the final boss. So unfortunately, they're not going to be able to take him out just yet. So, but it is important because it is the first time they've met. So there's that. But also, more to the point, this is a very character-driven episode as well, since obviously Claire and NotEnrique get closer in this episode because obviously the main thing is that Claire is worried that she'll lose NotEnrique at the end, and they wind up becoming closer because of it. While Toby we established that Toby is very loyal to Jim. That was established in previous episodes, but it's obviously a lot more apparent here. Toby is very loyal to Jim and is willing to do anything he can to help Jim get out of the Darklands. That is what the episode establishes. So, very important, very big thing. But of course, it's also more to the point. This is the episode where Steve officially starts to realize that there's more weirdness going on in Arcadia Oaks. Obviously there was the whole thing with the stalking, which knocked him off his scooter. He didn't fully understand what was happening. He just knew something weird was happening. He didn't fully understand it. And here, even more so, he doesn't fully understand what was going on. He just realizes that something weird is going on currently, and he's now this is kind of sort of where he's going to start figuring this out. This is probably his worst episode, but it is the episode where he finally starts to realize all the weirdness that's going on. Because first and foremost, Toby uses the glamour mask to turn into Jim, which he doesn't fully understand what is. He's confused by that. At which point, when he tries to expose Toby, he winds up seeing a water appear from the sky with no real explanation. And then he gets knocked out by a crate that also inexplicably comes out of nowhere. So yeah, he's starting to figure out there's some weird stuff going on in Arcadia Oaks now. This is the first episode where that officially happens. Because obviously it was implied he did figure that out earlier, but he hasn't officially figured it out yet. This is part of his character arc for this season. He does eventually figure out that there's some weird stuff going on in Arcadia Oaks and tries to uncover it. So that winds up being a major thing. But Yeah, in any case, that's gonna do it for my review of Trollhunters. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well if you want to help support me. I would very much appreciate it. Please go do that. Go and check out my Discord. Link is down in the description. I'm trying to migrate people over there, so please go do that. Follow me on Twitter if you want to. Again, and also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!